All right, people. So, energy contributions during exercise. The objective here is to get you guys to understand what's going on while you're exercising, so that can help you formulate a plan with your eating and your nutrition. Macronutrients, so macronutrients being your protein, your fat, and your carbohydrate. You can see in the diagram here that it changes, so the percentage contribution will change depending on what the intensity of your exercise is. So it's seated or sitting, of course there's going to be less intensity, so overall calorie expenditure is going to be very low, but the contribution of fat will be greater and less carbohydrate. Now, of course, there will be carbohydrate being utilised because the brain requires it and other functions, bodily functions. So this is where some people kind of mistake this kind of, I'm in the fat burning zone. You technically are, but the overall calorie expenditure is very low. Okay, so not a good approach if you're looking to lose weight. Anyway, moving on, you can see that the shift go over on the other side of the high intensity endurance exercise. So this could be cross country skiing as depicted there, or just running hard, cycling hard in the gym, doing circuits perhaps, where your heart rate is high. Okay, it's up there and you're basically blowing for a long time. And you can see that the contribution, so there's much more carbohydrate required to maintain this intensity, and much less fat. You can see even the protein, there's more protein required, and we'll perhaps go into that at the end. But just to kind of get you guys to think about when you're doing your exercise, you picture yourself, whether it's running or in the circuits in the gym or cycling, and you're thinking about, you're cycling along on the flat, it's all quite easy, you've got a high cadence. The percentage of the energy contribution there will probably look a bit more like this. And then when you start hitting the hill, it may look a little bit like this, so you start getting the speed up. So you could be on the flat, really, really going for it, running hard or whatever it is. And you can see, hopefully this will help give you a sort of visualization how things change. So ultimately, if you can sort of imagine that and take that away and think about, what's required of the task. So next time maybe you're doing a long bike ride or a long run and it's quite hilly, you will need, especially if it's over 2 hours, where remember we've only got about 2 hours of, assuming that your dietary intake is good, of carbohydrate until that will be depleted, especially if you're working above your threshold. So, and threshold meaning that change, that shift here. So we're utilizing much more carbohydrate than we would normally do. Now, moving on to the next slide, you can see that actually with exercise, and this is the importance of aerobic exercise, is that if you get fitter, you'll ultimately burn more fat to fuel rather than using carbohydrate. So if you are, let's use cycling as an analogy, if you're out on the bike and your sort of average speed, let's just say it's 25 kilometers per hour, and normally when you keep that up for, let's just say, an hour or 2 hours, you start to fade a little bit. Well, that shift will probably be because there's more demand on carbohydrate to keep yourself there. Now, the fitter you get, you might be able to maintain that speed, but for longer, ultimately, because the fitter you are, the more fat you're going to use instead of shifting into that carbohydrate. And this is displayed here in this graph. So you can see that before training in the black, ultimately there was more carbohydrate utilized, and then after training less so. And then with the fat, other way around. So you can see that after training, actually there was more fat being utilized. So hopefully that will give you motivation. The fitter you get, the more fat you tap into. So for those who do some, I suppose, more long distance stuff, if you're in the gym, and you're just doing a quick strength workout, you don't need any sort of You don't really need any food unless you've been missing your meals for whatever reason. But if you're going out on the bike or going out running or doing an obstacle course or whatever it is, something with endurance in nature, then you do need to consider the carbohydrate intake. And this is an example. If you're on a low carbohydrate diet, you're going to fade quicker. And then if you're on a normal diet, you can continue a little bit longer. But if you've got a surplus of carbohydrate, you can sustain much longer. There are people that talk about the ketone diet and suggesting that on a low carbohydrate diet, you can sustain, you can do your endurance stuff. Now, absolutely, but the question would be when it comes to any intensity, so hitting a hill or picking up the speed above the threshold that you're working at, you're not going to be able to go on for that long because you're going to have less carbohydrate in the system to start with, and if you're trying to fuel on nuts or whatever it is, your body's just not going to be able to get that energy in quickly. You might be able to go on and on for ages, but you're not going to be doing it very quickly. Hopefully that clarifies a few things with regards to the sort of ketone debate. Exercise and protein metabolism. So this one is just an example of, actually, if you're doing any sort of intense aerobic work, you do need to consider taking maybe some amino acids during your exercise, and also increasing your protein intake. So trying to have protein in regular intervals, so breakfast, lunch, afternoon, snack, and then dinner would be ideal. With any long duration stuff that you're doing, having some amino acids in your drink, for example. And the reason why I say that is the nitrogen balance. You can see here there's much more. So if plus was excess protein in the diet, and minus was less, so in more catabolic state, you can see that a runner, so let's just assume this bracket is endurance, because this would go for cyclists as well, or people who are nuts for circuits. You will need some extra protein in there compared to even the bodybuilders, and that's just the catabolic nature of the exercise. And that pretty much sort of rounds up this. If there's any questions, of course, fire away, and hopefully you can take away a little bit and use that to your training.